A recurring objection to the Israel-only framework is the claim that there were no meaningful descendants of the northern tribes remaining in the regions where Jesus and Paul ministered. This objection assumes a level of genealogical clarity that simply did not exist in antiquity. In the absence of any biological verification, first-century Jewish identity functioned covenantally, socially, and culturally, not genetically. Paul did not identify Israelites by blood tests. He addressed covenant standing through faith, loyalty, and participation within Israel's covenant world. That distinction is essential for understanding both Galilee and the so-called Gentiles of the New Testament. Galilee, called Galil Hagoyim, district of the nations, in Isaiah 9:1, was the northernmost region of historic Israel, bordering Phoenicia and Syria. Biblically, it lay within the territories originally allotted to Naphtali, Zebulun, Asher, and Issachar per Joshua 19. When Assyria invaded the northern kingdom in 722 BCE, large portions of this region were depopulated and resettled with foreign populations per 2 Kings 17. However, ancient sources are clear that the deportation was not total. Substantial numbers of Israelites remained in the land and intermingled with newcomers over centuries. Josephus confirms this demographic continuity when he describes Galilee in the 1st century as densely populated, culturally Jewish, and fiercely loyal to Israelite customs. He notes that Galilee contained numerous towns and villages and was thoroughly committed to the Jewish way of life. Source: The Jewish War, 3:3.1-2. Modern archaeology supports this picture. Mark Chauncey concludes that Galilee in the early Roman period was overwhelmingly Jewish in population and practice, with synagogues, ritual baths, and Torah observance widespread throughout the region. Source: The Myth of a Gentile Galilee, pages 3-7. Despite this, Galileans were routinely disparaged by Judean elites. Their distance from Jerusalem, rural character, and proximity to non-Israelite populations led southern Jews to regard them as religiously inferior or compromised. Rabbinic traditions later mocked Galileans for their accents and perceived laxity, a stereotype already reflected in the Gospels per Matthew 26:73. Yet the presence of synagogues throughout Galilee, see Matthew 4:23 and Luke 4:15-16, demonstrates that they were not pagans but Torah-oriented Israelites operating outside Jerusalem's temple-centered power structure. This social marginalization is precisely what gives Galilee its theological weight. Isaiah 9:1-2 locates the dawn of Israel's restoration not in Jerusalem, but in Galilee, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, Galilee of the nations. Matthew explicitly applies this prophecy to Jesus' Galilean ministry per Matthew 4:13-16. The symbolism is deliberate. Restoration begins where exile began. The northern regions first devastated by Assyria become the first recipients of messianic light. Jesus' choice to begin his ministry in Galilee and to gather disciples almost entirely from that region is not accidental. It reflects a restoration pattern deeply embedded in Israel's prophetic imagination. As N.T. Wright observes, Jesus' actions consistently enact the return from exile story in symbolic and concrete way. Source: Jesus and the Victory of God, pages 268-272. Galilee, long viewed as compromised and second-rate, becomes the nucleus of renewed Israel. It is important, however, to be precise at this point. Galileans cannot be demonstrated to be pure or traceable descendants of the 10 northern tribes in any strict genealogical sense. What can be said, historically and responsibly, is that Galilee represented a population shaped by northern Israelite inheritance, intermingled with outsiders, yet fully embedded in Israel's covenantal life. Identity here is covenantal, not biological. This distinction is crucial because it avoids replicating the very bloodline absolutism that the covenantal inclusion model rejects. This same covenantal logic explains the New Testament's treatment of Gentiles. Paul's Gentile mission does not require that every person he addressed be a literal descendant of Jacob, nor does it require that they be pagans wholly outside Israel's covenant world. Second Temple Judaism already recognized categories such as proselytes and God-fearers, people of non-Israelite ancestry who were legally and religiously attached to Israel. As Shea J.D. Cohen notes, conversion to Judaism did not erase ethnic origin. It altered covenantal and legal status. Source: The Beginnings of Jewishness, page 109. Ethnic descriptors often persisted even after covenantal inclusion. Thus, when Paul addresses ethne, he is not invoking a rigid biological category. He is addressing peoples defined by origin and dispersion who stood in varying degrees of covenantal attachment to Israel. Some were culturally indistinguishable from surrounding nations, others were synagogue-attached, Torah-instructed, or already worshippers of Israel's God. Faith, for Paul, functioned as the covenantal mechanism by which true Israel was reckoned, not as a DNA test, but as loyalty to Israel's God and Messiah. Seen in this light, Galilee and the Gentile mission belong to the same restoration story. Jesus begins with Israel's marginalized northern regions. Paul extends the message to those dispersed among the nations who had become estranged from visible Israelite identity. Two different social locations, one covenantal trajectory. Both groups were rejected or dismissed by Jerusalem-centered religious elites, and both were reclaimed through the same covenantal logic. In short, Galileans were not foreign pagans, nor were they a biologically pure remnant. They were covenantally Israelite, socially marginalized, and prophetically central. Likewise, the Gentiles Paul addressed were not defined by exclusion from Israel's story, but by their place within it, often obscured, often contested, but never outside the covenantal framework Scripture itself provides. This reading does not depend on unverifiable genealogies. It rests on covenant, history, and the interpretive world of the texts themselves.